So now we enter part 9 on this. We've gotten into discussing angels and things, and he's telling you right now that the gods of other people, and in fact the angels themselves, are the lesser gods. Somebody that looks into religion can easily see that they have all these messengers, these things that do things. And even though they've tried to scrub it clean and say that it's just this one guy or so on, in fact, it can't be that one guy, it's three. It's Asherah or the Holy Ghost. It's Jesus Christ. It's this, it's that. It's all together in one. And they still try to describe three people as one. Like a triplet in music, by the way. Let's go into this here and see if we can finish.
Usually referred to as the gods. And basically, in the Christianization of the ancient pagan traditions, the gods were replaced by the angels. But their function.
So he just said it there, that in the Christianization of all these ancient pagan things they knew, the angels took the place of the other gods. That's all that's really happened here.
Function within the cosmic hierarchy is identical. And so the fact that the measure of a man, a human, is the same as the measure of the angel is very interesting, because it's saying that we're somehow linked to the gods through a common system of measure.
Well, that's all over the Bible. People don't catch it and everything, but of course this is a Caucasian Bible talking about themselves, and they had this belief that they must have been spawned forth by the gods because of how much more advanced they were than anyone else. They were someone that was selected by the gods and so on.
But notice the numbers, 144 cubits. Of course, you got to ask, what is a cubit? And that leads us into some interesting digressions there. Also the 12,000 furlongs. Well, anybody know how much a furlong is? What is a furlong? Furlongs have almost fallen into disuse. It's a British or English unit of measurement, but it found its way into the King James Bible. It was basically the British counterpart of the Greek stade, which had...
Or stadium, if you will. And how are these stadiums built? Well, let's see if I can go out a little more here and show you that what he's talking about here is horse racing. Of course, we know where horses come from in the first place, so the connection that goes on there. But how long is a furlong? Well, it's 1/8 of a mile. So it's a designation that's like, well, whenever you do race cars, you either race them in the 1/8 mile or in the 1/4 mile. 2 times around, or 2/4 miles, will become that half. So just like horses, we end up having quarter horses that are extremely fast over a short period of place, and then thoroughbreds that are made for long distance running. Let's continue.
At various lengths, but basically the same length as the furlong. What was the furlong? Furlong, where is a furlong used today?
Horse track.
Yeah, who goes to the track? Horse racing. A furlong is 660 feet, 1/8 part of a mile. Well, here's what's interesting about the furlong. If you multiply it by 12 to convert it to inches, you discover that the furlong is exactly 7,920 inches.
There's that number again, guys.
Where did we see that number?
That's the Earth.
This is now a test of your memory. The diameter of the Earth. Remember I said the diameter of the Earth taken through the tropics? The sacred number that's...
Well, remember whenever I told you that whenever they did this horse racing, it was racing around the world? What the hell is that supposed to mean? Well, it's in design of it. It's in its size. It's encapsulated in it.
Representing the Earth. The furlong is to the inch as the Earth is to a mile. It's a proportion. This is a sacred proportion that was intentionally embodied into the units of measurement. So that we lay out a furlong, right, 660 feet, 1 inch, which is derived from our thumb, the width of our thumb, right there, you can check it out. Put your thumb on there and you'll discover it's 1 inch wide. That's the digit. So the thumb is to your foot in this cosmic relationship of 12 to 1. And when you pace, like this is how a pace was generally considered. You start from one point, put your heel against a point, and in every other step you count. 1, 2, 3.
Like in military, when they go your left, your left, your left, right, left, and then they start singing a song or doing whatever, that's a pace. Yeah, that's a pace right there. And even though there's a bunch of different sizes to people in the service, they all pace at the same cadence. Let's continue.
1,000 of those, averaging 5.28 feet, gave us the mile. Right? 1,000 times 5.28 is 5,280. And that was the origin of the mile. The mile is literally a mill, 1,000 human paces. The pace, think about the pace, what that is. Our foot, our pace. Our pace, our foot is what anchors us to the earth. Our pace is what moves us about the face of the earth, right? The most fundamental relationship we have with the earth, our feet, right? That ratio of pace to foot, 5.28. Now, we have, the furlong is 12,000 of these things, right? 12,000, the holy city is 12,000 of these things, 660 feet. Multiply that out, you discover 7,920,000 feet.
There we go with that number again.
So how big is that? Well, divide that by the number of feet in a mile, 5,280, and what you discover is it's precisely 1,500 miles. So what would be 1,500 miles in diameter?
Can you tell me what's 1,500 miles in diameter? I'm not going to give it away here. Give an idea of it though. When the Earth is 7920, it's got to be a lot smaller than that. But we found out that the diameter of the moon was 2160, not 1,500. So it's going to be smaller than that. But it's cosmic in origin too.
Is there some object out there that could be 1,500 miles in diameter? It's certainly described as being something they see in the heavens, right? Well, I'll leave this one an open-ended question for right now, but here's something that's interesting. If we take this number and divide it into, compare it to the Earth, to get a sense of scale, Earth, 7,920, Holy City, 1,500. So we put 7,920 over 1,500.
What's that come
And
out?
if you quickly do that calculation in your head, you'll discover that 1,500 goes into 7,920 exactly 5.28 times.
Is that a coincidence? Does anybody listening think that that's a coincidence in any way?
The relationship of our foot to our pace. So here's a very strange correlation. The earth to the holy city is the same as the pace to the foot. Well, what are they trying to say there? Well,
Something very
one of the
profound.
implications of this, it follows from this truth. The truth is that we humans are ultimately designed according to the cosmic measure. We were created in the image of God, right? And God is the ultimate cosmic measure. And we, being created in the image of God, embody the cosmic measures. So when Protagoras said man is the measure of all things, what he was implying is that we are the ultimate yardstick for the cosmos.
I think it's cool it's got a Egyptologist 7's icon right in the middle of that Merkaba sign that's there.
In fact, when one looks at the scale of phenomena, from the human up to the largest macro scale that we know of, and from the human down to the smallest micro scale we know of, where are we within that hierarchy? Right smack in the middle. So there's as much above us as there is below us. There's as much greater than us as there is lesser than us. And I think that's one of the implications of this, is that when we begin looking at our sacred geometry, we realize it's the ultimate fusion of all of these phenomena on all scales, And the ultimate component, or the ultimate symbol of all that fusion is we ourselves. And then, of course, ultimately, it's our consciousness, because, like I said, with his name written in our forehead, what that means is that when you study sacred geometry, you're literally building an edifice in your consciousness. You're building a form out of your own, the material of your own conscious mind that reflects this order of nature, of cosmic nature that's all about
Flower
us.
of life.
And that's the power, and why study of sacred geometry can ultimately be a key to accessing lots of other things like the Kabbalah and the alchemy and the Hermetic wisdom and the Gnostic traditions.
And this is Metatron's cube, again mentioned in your Bible. Now, I saw this whenever I was a kid. I was like, Metatron, and this was before the Transformers and everything, but it made me think there's something like that. Like, we're all going to become robots or something? What is Metatron? I mean, because that's pulling off a whole lot of things. Well, there's a symbol that equates it here that people knew in ancient times. And you can find them in Egypt, all over the known Caucasian world, and places that we aren't supposed to believe that they actually visited and did more than visit.
The traditions of the Vedas and so forth. There it is, 12,000 furlongs. The city lieth foursquare. 48,000 furlongs on a perimeter. It's also described as cubical. 12,000 furlongs equals 7,920,000 feet, which equals 1,500 miles. The total perimeter, 31,680. That has a profound mystical significance, which we will save for another time. So there it is, a tabulation of some of the stuff we've covered. The diameter of the earth is 7920. 1 furlong, 7920 inches. The diameter of the New Jerusalem, 7,920,000 feet, which is 1,500 miles. 1 mile is 5,280 feet, or 1,000 paces of 5.28 feet. 1.5 miles is 7,920 feet.
There goes that number again. It just keeps happening. You seeing the pattern here?
And here's the pace to the foot, equals the earth to the holy city, which equals 7,920 to 1,500, and there's that magic ratio of 5.28 that links the earth to this other cosmic entity, for now going unnamed, that relates to our own scale exactly as our pace does to our foot. And what you discover is that if you're taller or shorter, it doesn't matter, because it's a proportional relationship. If you're taller, your pace, my pace is in excess of 6 feet. So 5.28, you're going to have a somewhat shorter, but you're going to discover that the ratio is relatively constant. Because as you get taller, presumably your feet get bigger, with some exceptions, right?
Not always. And when you're figuring the averages, you take the standard deviation that's in the middle there and throw out the oddities, things that don't even fit in the graph. Unless you're looking for such things. When you're trying to find a constant, you would do exactly the opposite and find the standard deviation and mean and where the center of that was. And the ancients did that a long time ago and used that in making so many temples and things. The Great Pyramid, Stonehenge, the Parthenon, ancient Gothic cathedrals. The roads themselves have it in it. It surrounds you.
I know some little people with really big feet. And here is the Hebrew cubit, which is 18 inches. Remember, 144 cubits according to the measure of a man, that is of the angel. We have the Egyptian royal cubit of 1.727 feet. The wall of the city was 144 cubits. If we take the 144 cubits that are the Hebrew cubits, it's 216 feet, or 2,592 inches. Add 1 0 on the end of that, and we have the great year cycle, 25,920 years.
Also, if you add a 0 on the front of that, on the end of that 216 number, you get 2160, and there we go again.
We express it instead in Egyptian cubits, which may have been the original intent, if not implying that either cubit was legitimate. 144 Egyptian royal cubits of 144 times 1.727 is 248.814. Move the decimal over 2 points, you got 24,881.4. Call that miles, and there's the circumference of the earth.
Wow.
24,881 miles. So there's all kinds of information embedded in here, but you've got to have the key to begin to unlock it. Okay, and then also notice that the moon, 2,160 miles, or 17,280 furlongs, we set the diameter of the moon to the diameter of the holy city, there's our 1.44 ratio.
So these numbers just keep popping up. It's also the measure of the wall of the city of 144 cubits and so on. So you can see this repeated factor going on over and over again. Let's look at something else deeper in the cycles of time, looking at the zodiac thing there in the bottom right hand corner here in a minute.
So what we have here is this redundancy over and over again. We have these same numbers recurring over and over again in the measure of time and space, both in absolute dimensions, but also in the proportional relationships that result from comparing these various entities of time and space. As we've learned now, the diameter of the moon is 2160 miles, the diameter of the sun is 864,000.
And of course, if we were to look at just half of that, giving us a radius, it's 1080 on the moon. And in the sun, it's 432 or 432,000 miles in diameter, but 108, huh? How's this working out? Well, if you'll check it out, the representation even works between entities like this.
As it turns out, if you take the diameter of the sun and multiply it by this number right here, it gives us the distance between the earth and the sun.
And that's right there at the number that we give for the distance of the sun. It pulses in and out slightly, closer to us and farther away, and we're the ones that actually are pulsing in and out slightly, by the way, going from some 92 million miles to 93.3 here. But there's more connections too, back the other way.
And if we take the diameter of the moon, which is 2160, multiply it by the same factor of 108, we discover that we now have the Earth-Moon distance. So
literally, the distance to the moon from the Earth is taken from sacred geometry, and it's a point in that also. So is the sun. So is Earth. It's an incredible connection here. It's a sacred geometry. Why? Because it connects us and all things cosmic and the earth. We are stardust. It's all hooked up together. How the hell did these people figure it out? Was it just the Sumerians popped up like popcorn? Or is this something that culminated at that point?
So it's this 108 factor, this 108 spacing, this proportional relationship. We can express it this way. Solar distance to solar diameter equals lunar distance to lunar diameter, and the value of that proportion is the sacred number 108.
Wow.
As we see embodied right here in Bak Haeng of Cambodia from the 12th century with its 108 towers.
The ancient land of Mu.
And there are many examples of how these numbers were incorporated into the fabric of sacred architecture. That there has been some kind of a universal system at use in the ancient world. And these various cultural groups, whether it was the Egyptians or Sumerians or Mayans or the Hopewellians or the megalithic builders, had access to some universal system from some source that was outside their own cultural context. And I suggest...
You know who we have connected to this? I'm sure if you watch some of my videos, you realize who it is.
That the source of that goes back into deep time, that takes us back beyond the threshold of known history into the realm of mythical history, which means we're going back like into the Ice Age, back into the Pleistocene, to use the geologist term, back into the deep recesses of the human tenure on planet Earth, whose only memory has come down to us not in the form of recorded history, but in the form of myth. And
Graham Carlton, Graham has stated that we're a species with amnesia. And in Carlson's showing about Halloween and about how the things I showed up to hooked up to Halloween, he uses one of Merlin's quote that it's the bane of men that they forget. Sounds just like that statement that was put as one of the most outstanding statements in Lord of the Rings, when she tells you there were things that were forgotten that should not have been. But they aren't actually forgotten at this point. They're trying to be ignored. That's a dragon on your left. On your right, it's an ancient Sumerian. Looks like he's wearing a pocket watch or a wristwatch, and then he has a lightning bolt effect. What is that? That's that same lightning bolt effect that Neptune shows, or Shiva, or pretty much any of these storm gods. Why did everything change over to storm gods? Because that's the way it was supposed to work in the first place. Everybody's did. Yahweh's like a storm god. Jesus is the sun.
Epic story and legend and so forth. Because as it turns out, if we, and this is again is a good topic for the sacred geometry class, when we analyze Plato's description of Atlantis, Plato basically gave the date of the sinking of Atlantis as 9,000 years prior to Solon, the Egyptian, the Athenian poet and statesman Solon did a 10-year exile in Egypt, and it was Solon that brought back the tale of Atlantis and presented it to the Greeks. And
amazingly, if you look at the Greeks' description of Atlantis, a lot of those circular patterns, that's water and land, water and land, the concentric circles breaking in, those are also listed in like furlongs or stadia on how big they are. There's sacred geometry in that also. Let's continue.
And Solon basically made that journey around 600 BC. So if you add the 9,000 years to the 600 BC, we come up with a date of about 11,600 years ago for Plato's date for the demise of Atlantis. Well, it's very interesting that the date 11,600 years has been independently discovered by geologists looking at the tempo of various catastrophes that have occurred on Earth. And to those catastrophes is where I'm now going to turn. Catastrophes in the time of man, the tempo of global change. What I've done here is I put a time bar that goes from the present, right here. This is us now. This is today. Right here is May 3rd at 4 o'clock. Is it 4 o'clock? That's right here. And this is 150,000 years ago. And the reason I used 150,000 years is that some of the earliest skeletal remains ever discovered of modern humans date back to 150 to even to 180,000 years. Skeletons that appear to be indistinguishable from a modern skeleton.
Well, since then, we've actually found another skeleton in Jebel Arud, and it's dating to 325,000 years ago. So that puts another notch on how long the people have been here. But they weren't exactly Homo sapiens sapiens just yet. That really happens about the timeline that he's talking about.
Which suggests that modern humans with presumably equivalent intelligence to our own were present on the planet at least this far back. So here we've got a 150,000 year time span. You'll notice this little red bar at the end. That red bar represents the span of recorded history, which is basically the advent of Sumerian cuneiform writing. So if it turns out that there were modern humans living through this whole span of time, why is there no history? Well, now you got to do is turn to these various things that I've put on here. These are events that have occurred. And
Now, these events have been put on this timeline, and he's going to show you something extremely conspicuous about it. I talked about this in one of my other sacred geometry videos with this idea of cyclic catastrophes that seemingly happen to the earth.
And I used a certain criteria for these events, and here's the criteria I used. I began studying the record of geological change, climate change, environmental change, and I focused on events that could be considered catastrophic. And
You can just look through ancient stuff, and now all these scientists figured out, well, the dinosaurs got hit about 65 million years ago. This happened, that happened, so on. The Toba event and other ones that are listed on that chart that he's showing you right there, and they put them on. What I find amazing here is that he decided to go ahead and put it on a timeline chart, and then knowing the idea of the great year and the little sections that break it up, he turned around and divided each one by his thing, and whenever they come out to a flat number, he's got a connection here, and he ends up putting those on. But how often does this happen? Well, it seems to be cyclic, and it seems to happen around two different points here, with only a couple that aren't on that exacting point. Let's look into that.
Catastrophic to the extent that were an event of an equivalent magnitude to occur now, it would basically end civilization as we know it. That's the criteria. What would be the magnitude of an event that it would take to terminate our modern industrial civilization? That's the criteria that I used. Then I began to search through the record of all of the events that would be of that magnitude or greater. And the events that I found so far have been entered onto this graph, and they're listed all here. You can see them. And how many do we have here? And this is not complete necessarily, but we have at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 of them in 150,000 years.
So some are around 10,000 years apiece. Well, a couple of those could just be flukes, volcano, this, that, and the other, da-da-da. Well, if you take those couple of flukes out that don't fit exactly onto a scale timeline, you're put at least, well, 10 to 15,000 years, somewhere around 12,000 years, this seems to reoccur again and again. Hold on a second. That goes with one of our numbers here. That's looking across at the zodiac whenever we're exactly opposite of when it happens. And then the other one is, oh wow, exactly when we are now. I'll show you representation of that in a minute.
So at least 16 times in the last 150,000 years there have been climate or environmental or geological catastrophes powerful enough that were they to occur today would essentially put us back into the Stone Age. Would essentially, if you think about some of the small catastrophes we have seen in the last few years, from the destruction of New Orleans to the great tsunami, to some of the big earthquakes that we've seen, New Orleans is still not recovered. But you've got to imagine what would happen if an event that was one order of magnitude greater than Katrina happened. By that I mean 10 times worse. Let's say that we had 10 cities decimated to the extent of New Orleans. We could certainly recover from that, but it would be a major effort to do so.
You can imagine if there was a couple of hurricanes, all it would take is a couple of them that were as bad as Katrina running across Oh, the Dominican Republic and all that, and twisting around and running in up here and hitting Houston and Galveston and so on. Well, what if there's another one that comes across and hits Florida's eastern seaboard and starts rolling up the seaboard and tears up three major cities that's there? What if another one shows up and wheels in somehow? You could easily end up with 10 cities that get totally decimated, but that doesn't ruin us all. It's just going to be a hell of a thing to come back from. Let's look at something a little bit more worse.
Now what if we were talking about 2 orders of magnitude? Let's say, to put it into a rough equivalency, an event that could cause the decimation of 100 major urban areas. Could we recover from that?
This would take a super volcano event, like people talk about Yellowstone and so on, or perhaps something bigger than a football stadium coming in, whizzing at over 30,000 miles an hour and impacting the earth. And you think, well, that's only going to affect where it hits. No, it's not. Once it gets to a certain point here, this magnitude starts multiplying itself, and we get to a certain point here, it's screwed up everything enough to where the whole world gets affected and falls under its spell, if you will.
Questionable. Now let's go 3 orders of magnitude. And now we're talking about the equivalent of 1,000 major cities completely decimated. Okay, at that level, 3 orders of magnitude, that's what these are. Those are events that essentially would be 3 orders of magnitude. Once you begin to ponder this, it becomes apparent why there isn't a record, an extant record of what's been going on for the whole time that we humans have been here. Now, at this point, you probably haven't tied this in with what we've been saying before, other than I'll point out a few things to you that should be: onset of the late Wisconsin Ice Age, 26,000 years before present. Remember the great year and the precessional cycle? Add about 80 years to that, we've got 26,000. Of course, 26,000 you figure plus or minus a few centuries. Now, you come through that cosmic clock that I showed you, right? Halfway to the cusp of the age of Leo. 12,900 years ago, roughly. And what happened? We have something that happened 12,900 years before present. Onset of the Younger Dryas climate catastrophe, first phase of the megafaunal extinctions.
Coming out of the last ice age, basically, and whenever you look at the data on it, we went through something hellacious while that happened. First there was a bowling Elrod event, and then we got smacked with something apparently, and it drove us down. And we're still debating on whether or not a solar flare was involved, or maybe even the rest of this comet ran into the sun, and whenever it did so, a solar flare was shot out our way. But one thing's for sure, that puts itself right on that line there across from us, because we're basically right down here. And if we're right down here, then that's directly across from us, and that's that 2590 period. Well, that's half of it, 12/6 if you will. Let's continue here and watch how these play out and line up on this.
Now here what I've done is I've entered some green dots. Now look at what the green dots are. The green dots are basically derived directly from the model of the great year, based upon cycles of 6,480, 12,960, and then 25,920. And you'll notice how high of a correlation there is between the tempo of events, the actual events that have been derived by scientists without any reference to this great year model at all.
No, they haven't looked at where it plots out here on the major events that we know of, the catastrophes that have happened in the last couple 100,000 years. Well, all he's really done here is figured out the time-wise, and it strangely is going and pegging itself on 2 major points of these cyclic events here. One down here where we're at, and the other one up top. You can tell the one up top's gotten hit a couple more times there than it got hit where we currently are. And there's a couple of strays that are just about on those sidebars that are there on the left side and the right. But this points out that, yeah, we're due too. In fact, we're overdue by 2 on it being our turn right now when we're talking about. Let's continue.
And the timing of these ages of the world. Remember the 6,480 years, that was the bull, the lion, the eagle, and the man. And according to the traditions, each of those seasons of the great year is inaugurated by some type of a great event, a transformative event, a catastrophe, if you will. And what I've done here is I have developed a data set that shows the correlation. It certainly seems from a study of this graph that these intervals, these event nodes as I call them, the susceptibility of something happening goes up exponentially for a short period of time. Here's the analogy.
It's like that. Well, he's fixing to give you an analogy. I'll just let him do it.
That I have used. You're out driving along a quiet country road. You've got it on, cruise control. You're kicking back. You're listening to some tunes. You're not paying much attention. You're talking on your cell phone. Not much traffic. Okay, now you come up to a major highway. The cars are like this. Well, you're crossing that intersection, and while you're crossing that intersection, now suddenly you got to put your cell phone down and start paying attention, because if you don't, you're going to get T-boned, right? Well, obviously, we don't have any way to turn or stop our car, the Earth here. So the only way we can stop it is to get something up in space. So if something starts heading toward us, that we can super blow it up with nuclear weapons, or, well, there's a bunch of different ideas for doing it. But I'll tell you one thing, if we sit around with our thumb up our ass until it happens and then don't have enough time to fix it, we're all screwed. I feel like we're standing around at about that point right now. When I was a kid, we did so much space exploration, and we're gearing towards this point. Now you look at what NASA does. They've got to hire out other people like Elon Musk to even put stuff up in orbit and things, guys. It's really created quite a change, hasn't it? You've got your whole journey, and each time you cross an intersection of a major highway, the potential of a catastrophe increases considerably over what it would be while you're out there on the lonely country road. Well, you see, our planet is on a cosmic highway around the galaxy. And we're now beginning to understand the fine structure of the galaxy, and we realize that there is a pattern and an order to it. And there's a tempo of these orbital revolutions. There's a tempo of the galaxy. And there's a wave pattern of the Earth moving up and down, above and below the galactic plane. And
whenever we shift up and through this mess, and down and through this mess, and up and through this mess, and down and through this mess. And it looks like it pegs right on those cycles there. Like, well, there ain't so much up here, and there ain't so much way down there. But right in the middle of that, there's a huge chance of hitting something.
Within that, there are suborbital cycles as well. And we also discovered that there seems to be a tempo in the delivery of cosmic matter to the inner solar system.
So when you take those bigger, larger planets that they keep telling you always block, and they're our big blocker guy, well, if it's just a little bit early or just a little bit late from the direction it's coming in, that actually helps to sling it towards the inside. So exactly the opposite of what they're saying. If you want to look at reality sometime and see all the things that have gone just over our shoulder, look at the amount of craters on the moon that are facing us. It always faces us, right? And so those things went right over our shoulder and impacted on the moon.
It doesn't seem to be random. And this is going to be beyond the scope of today's lecture. But what I'm getting at here is that the evidence now supports the conclusion that the delivery of cosmic material and energy, the energy pulses that would be affecting Earth, are non-random, that they are on some kind of a cosmic timetable, a cosmic tempo, if you will. And I think this is one of the most important insights we get from these ancient traditions, is the measurement of cosmic time and how it relates to us here on Earth. You just got to know what to look for and where to look for it. Once you begin to become aware of it and you begin to see it, you begin to realize that the cosmic fingerprints are everywhere about us. We're in fact living in and upon the wreckage of the former worlds. The rubble of these former worlds is all around us, but we haven't had the scale of perspective to see it. And that's where we're at now. I'm completely thrilled with things like the emergence of Google Earth, because Google Earth is now allowing
Reshot structure. Looks a lot like Atlantis.
us to just all of us, to sit at our computers and see the cosmic perspective of Earth. And when you look at it from the extraterrestrial point of view, things begin to show up that we don't see when we're right down here immersed on it, so close that we're like ants walking on the rubble and can't see what's around us.
It's almost like we need to step outside ourselves in a third person point of view, but of course have that ability to even do it in the first place, to get an overview enough to where we can make a rationale out of what's really going on here. Makes you wonder how they did it all in ancient times.
But we do see that we literally have built our own world and our own social system on top of and out of the wreckage of former worlds.
So that's it for the presentation, guys, and I want to thank you for watching. Thank you for watching Randall Clarkson's Here Thing. I want you to just, if you want to see the presentation itself without me mumbling all over it, trying to stop every once in a while and clarify a point or add a point in here, just look up Graham Carlson, Ancient Knowledge of Space, Time, and Cosmic Cycles. You'll find one's done by After School, and that's the one that I've got here, but somebody else recorded it, added a few more pictures in there at a certain point, and put it out. The original form you might be able to find if you look enough, but that doesn't have any of the pictures that we've been showing. That really helps out to show that cycle along with the numbers that are on there. Anyhow, guys, this has been quite an experience to end up going through a 10-parter basically here. One of my largest video sets I've ever done. Just in describing not all, but a few aspects of sacred geometry, showing you how it connects us to the world from the smallest thing to the size of the atom, all the way up to the giant size of the universe itself, Fibonacci sequences and all those things. For we are all, as Carl Sagan once said, we are all star stuff. Peace.